Alright, everybody, time for some Game of Thrones. It's the last episode of Season 7, and overall, I enjoyed it quite a bit. As I've mentioned probably at least in the first video, I'm not a hardcore fanboy of the books, so unlike the legions of fanboys on Reddit and the Song of Ice and Fire website, that are nitpicking and bitching and moaning and whining about everything that goes on in the show, yet still watch every single episode and probably watch it multiple times just so they can, make their whining and crying about everything's a little more in depth and detailed. I don't really have too much of a problem at this point because I know what I'm going to be getting from the writers of the show. That it's not going to be a masterpiece as far as storytelling, and plenty of plot holes, continuity issues, and so on and so forth. So for all intents and purposes right now, it's kind of it's like popcorn fluff, but a little bit more sophisticated popcorn fluff, let's just say. Because George R.R. Martin is a lazy ass writer who just rested on his laurels and decided to do a bunch of, other stuff and let the show get past the books. And if you want to place the blame on anyone, blame it on him. He obviously doesn't care enough about the series or the fans to get off his fat ass and write the books to keep ahead. So, I'm not saying that D&D are not to blame for the crappy ideas that they've come up with to supplement, to supplement the existing story, because they don't have anything to go on. But like I said, George R. R. Martin is just as much to blame for this as they are. If he had finished his books, they would have had to adhere far more to what was going on in the books, and would have had a much easier time of, just painting by numbers instead of trying to come up with something to not only entertain to keep the ratings up among the casuals, but also satisfy, the more hardcore. And they're never going to satisfy the more hardcore fans. They hate D&D, and they pretty much have a love-hate relationship with the show. So, I really could care less what they think. Because if it's that bad, don't pay any attention to it. Don't watch it. I don't ever got or understood people that watch things purposely knowing that they're bad, so they can go and give it plenty of free press by making rant videos and whatnot. That being said, yeah, it was a good episode. Ended the season as we expected. Of course, there were some, like I said, there were some kind of head-scratching moments of things that didn't make sense and contradicted or ignored what happened previously, but what else is new? If you're not aware of that being the case now, then you're kind of a lost cause. Anyway, let's get started. So I'm not sure if the first opening scene of this episode is at Highgarden or not. I don't think it's supposed to be near King's Landing. So I'm going to assume it's at Highgarden because the Dothraki army is there. And they were leaving Highgarden on their, wagon train or whatever, to a supply train to get all that gold and stuff to King's Landing. So I'm assuming once they got their asses kicked by Daenerys' forces, they retreated back to that stronghold to kind of hold up and wait for whatever is going to happen. So maybe they aren't currently aware of the peace agreement or potential peace agreement meeting or truce or armistice or whatever. So Bronn and Jaime have some conversation as the Unsullied and the Dothraki hang out outside and kind of think, yeah, they're pretty much screwed if they decide to attack. But cavalry is not exactly that going to do much when it comes to taking over a fortress. It's kind of useless. It's fighting out on the field. The Unsullied, don't look like they have any kind of, siege equipment. So of course there's dragons, obviously, as the trump card. But if you're in a fortress that's on an elevation like I'm assuming they are, and all you've got is foot soldiers with spears and a bunch of cavalry, I don't imagine you're a huge threat as far as the siege is concerned. So, especially, they got with 1,000 barrels of hot oil. I think that's going, unless I guess maybe the Dothraki could fire some arrows at him, and I don't know. That would be about it, because I don't know if they're exactly gonna be able to break down the door, so to speak. But anyway, yeah, that's just kind of give us an idea of where the forces are at for Daenerys' side, and as well as where I guess Bronn and Jaime are currently held up at. That they managed to get away from the battlefield where they lost a lot of the Lannister army and some important military figureheads in the process as well. So I guess fast forward whatever amount of time, and Team Daenerys and Team Cersei meet up at the Dragon Pit so they can discuss their terms, or give or at least Team Daenerys can give the evidence of what's going on north of the Wall and why they should all be concerned. Of course, because apparently, dragons and flying around and burning stuff down is one thing, but a bunch of zombies north of the Wall, that can't possibly be the case. I mean, the Dothraki were never supposed to cross the Narrow Sea, and they crossed it, so it seems kind of silly that any more convincing would be needed. But I guess they have to have something to get everybody together to push the plot forward. So here we are, and some reunions between Podrick and Bronn and Tyrion, who Podrick was like Tyrion's squire, I think, at one point. So Podrick, the woman pleaser, and the Hound and Brienne meet, since she about killed him off a couple seasons ago. Managed to survive, but both of them are kind of a little more mellowed out, especially the Hound. And yeah, so basically everyone gathers. Sandor and his brother have an eye to eye, and people are probably thinking, "Oh, it's Clegane Bowl." But no, I'm pretty sure that was not going to happen. There was no precedent for it, really. I mean, shit would have had to have hit the fan in that meeting, and that was going to be kind of a downer, I guess, if they just all started fighting all of a sudden, or if it was a trap. That would have been kind of lame. So basically, Sandor did what I kind of predicted that he would do. Approach his brother, see that he'd been changed into some monstrosity, and basically leave it at that, and perhaps still one of these days he's going to come back and finish the job. This time, like I said, may be more of a mercy killing, given he's basically a reanimated corpse, bloated reanimated corpse. So yeah, that went through as I expected it to, and then of course Daenerys, fashionably late, shows up on her dragon and to make quite the entrance to drive home the point that she has dragons, but of course Cersei is only interested in taking note, as we see later, that there was only 2. So the whole time she it's probably a bit of a adrenaline rush having a couple big ass dragon come land close by and roar and everything, but it seems to be pretty calculating throughout the whole thing. So basically everyone shows up, and then Euron out of a sudden decides to be a jackass and try to demand that Theon bend the knee or he's going to kill his sister. Talks trash to Tyrion. Jaime tries to get him to sit down, and then Cersei eventually cracks the whip and has him to sit your ass down. So I'm not sure exactly what point that was trying to make, other than let Theon know that Yara is still alive, so that Theon still has motivation for scenes coming a little bit down the way. Basically, Tyrion and Jon came to give their piece, and then says, basically words aren't going to convince you. And so the Hound, who must be, pretty damn strong, that box, the crate in and of itself was probably too light, brings the white in, and wakes him up, and of course, the first thing that the White sees or makes contact with is Cersei, and heads at her with a full head of steam and tries to, get at her and kill her if he can, and they get to see, at least those that aren't aware of what's been going on, just exactly what they're dealing with, and they chop off some bits here and there, and the thing's still going strong. Qyburn's got the hand that's got the fingers wiggling. Looks like one of those Halloween gags. You have the candy dish or whatever, where if with the motion sensor that the hand starts moving if you try to grab a piece of candy or something. Kind of reminded me of. So he's fascinated with it, and of course, I think given his necromantic pursuits, his observation of it, and as being a hand of the queen, I guess. It would definitely work in the favor of Team Daenerys as far as this is a serious enemy we're dealing with. And we get the demonstration of the methods by which this creature can be killed. And, of course, I think that was enough for Cersei to initially decide that she was going to, or at least we were made to assume that she was going to decide to put aside her differences because of this. But I think she was basically being Cersei the whole time and, bluffing the whole time, which we kind of see is the truth later on. And basically decides, we'll team up and we'll fight the Great War, blah, blah, blah. But we are going to need you, Jon Snow, to not pick a side and to stay, I guess, as King of the North or Warden of the North or whatever. And people are probably like, all right, Jon, just give her this one thing and we can go and take care of the enemy, the real enemy. But of course, Jon is his father's son in more ways than one, and more, or let's just say his stepdad and his biological dad, as we'll see later on. Doesn't feel like lying and and hiding the fact that he's already declared his allegiance to Daenerys. It's going to be a good idea. So he is Jon, honest as to a fault, and straightforward, and basically says, "Nope, sorry, I can't do that. Daenerys is already my queen," and basically screws the whole thing up. And here they are getting let out of the balloon as Cersei and her group head out. And of course, Brienne tells Jaime, to hell with all this political, partisan nonsense and the honor of our houses and all this crap. It's like we're fighting an undead zombie army that's very difficult to kill, and it's coming our way. It's like it's like you can become part of House Night King if you want, but that's about the only house that'll be left if everyone is killed. So yeah, and also on a side note of that, as far as being added to the army of the dead, 1 million people in King's Landing, I don't think so. I remember 500,000, I think, was mentioned several seasons ago when either by Jaime, I might have, when he was talking about the Mad King, blowing up all the wildfire and killing everyone in King's Landing, and it was about 500,000. And I've looked at some research done as far as kind of comparing, the descriptions of the size of the cities and the land sizes and everything to what it would kind of more realistically be in a medieval setting. And 500,000 people in King's Landing is like way, way more than what would make sense from what I've read. And 1 million is absurd. Especially in the coming winter, that city would be screwed trying to feed that many people. That'd be massive, massive cannibalism, I can tell you that. But anyway, we're all a little bit saddened as audience members seeing that Jon kind of screwed the pooch, but Tyrion decides that there's maybe one more chance. I'm going to have to roll the dice, and I'm going to have to go and talk to my sister in person. And of course, they get the whole squabbling about who's, oh, poor me, poor you type of thing. And of course, Cersei having the daddy issues that she's always had, and the fact that she wasn't born with a penis is kind of her, her MO and the reason, and her reason why she is the way she is. that's why she clings to Jaime in that kind of bizarre incestuous relationship that they have, because he's basically her male counterpart. Like, like half of a whole, I guess you'd say, in the male half of her that completes her in that sense. But I thought it was kind of funny because she's trying to be this powerful woman, leader that's going to continue the Lannister line. Yet she immediately says, blames Tyrion. It's like, oh, if you hadn't killed Daddy would have kept us all safe, which I thought was kind of funny. I mean, that's not paraphrasing or anything, but that's basically what she said. Tyrion killed Tywin with crossbow bolt, and then things started to fall apart. The Tyrells and then the Faith Militant and the High Sparrow kind of swooped in, and and Cersei was made to be humiliated, and so on and so forth. And so I'm not all that sympathetic to Cersei. I think, she's I don't know if it would be, she's definitely a narcissist, but I don't know if she's a sociopath would be a proper diagnosis, but I don't think she cares about anyone but herself, and everyone in her life is basically a pawn and is expendable. Maybe Jaime being the exception, only if he doesn't push his treasonous or his betrayals too far. But Tyrion basically, gleans by the fact that Cersei is, a little rubbing over her belly and talking about her family and everything, that she's pregnant. Some may argue that that was unintentional and that he just managed to catch that gesture. But I personally think that she was setting him up the whole time. Because, he's already, 3 of her, Joffrey aside, the other 2 children died, that because, not because of him. Blaming him is foolish. I mean, Myrcella, put her in harm's way, but still that was the stupidity of the writing when it came to Dorne, and somehow, the House Martell being, avenged by killing everybody in House Martell. Yeah, that was like Trystane and Doran. Yeah, that was real smart. That was just crappy writing. So, but and then Tommen, of course, didn't have anything to do with Tyrion because his mom was basically, manipulating him just as much as the Tyrells were manipulating him. So yeah, but the fact that there's another baby and maybe Tyrion feels somewhat, because it's family and maybe he feels, because if this one survives and lives, that he doesn't want to, be responsible for the death of another, Lannister child. Who knows? But Cersei played him like a fiddle. And basically, we go out there afterwards, and Daenerys, tells Jon that she respects him or whatever for, standing by what he, and not lying about bending the knee to Daenerys. And then, Cersei and company come out and, we'll lend you our forces, blah, blah, blah. But of course, we see later she's full of crap. And that the whole thing of Euron Greyjoy saying, well, that's the first thing that terrified me or whatever, which that wasn't acted very well. They could have picked some better dialogue to convince us that he was actually scared, because it sounded like, something Cersei told him to say. So, I mean, I didn't pick up immediately the fact that it was, a ruse, but now that you look back on it, it's like he could have played it off a little bit better. I've, traveled the world and seen things you couldn't believe, and this is the first thing that's terrified me. Yeah, it's like, alrighty then. We go back to Winterfell, and Littlefinger's playing his little manipulative games as usual, trying to get Sansa to think that Arya is plotting her destruction. And normally, of course, we show it as her seemingly like completely convinced when, but of course it's on purpose so that we are set up for the scene to come. But normally you would say, well, okay, what's the alternative? Why maybe she's here? Because, not necessarily the worst case scenario, but we aren't privy to that, of course. But so I'm just was kind of curious, if, playing it that way was the only way to kind of build it up so that we'd assume that Arya was screwed or not. But yeah, Sansa, they definitely kind of play her there as, oh, great, Sansa still hasn't learned her lesson. But we'll see that that's not necessarily the case in a little bit. And Daenerys and Jon decide that they'll sail over together. So instead of Daenerys coming on her dragon, so the North doesn't see her coming in as the conqueror on the dragon, she sees her with the King of the North, hand in hand, coming together as an alliance, and so on and so forth. So, which is a smart idea. Like I said, you want to, if you want, the North is pretty proud and not exactly overly concerned what goes on in the south of the kingdom, as long as their bannermen are loyal to the king that they've sworn allegiance to, like Robert Baratheon, etc. So yeah, that was basically that scene in a nutshell. Theon and Jon have a conversation about, and Theon gets to kind of get a bit off his chest of, his internal conflicts, being basically a captive of the Starks, even though he wasn't raised, poorly. He was treated like a family member. And then coming back, to the Iron Islands and meeting his biological father, and then his biological father, him being someone that he didn't want to let down. He wanted to be, loved by his biological father, obviously. So he had maybe chose poorly to decide to be Theon Greyjoy and leave his Stark allegiance behind when Robb needed him the most, because the Greyjoys sabotaging, or at least coming in to sabotage things, thanks to Theon, did not help in the War of the Five Kings, needless to say. And we get to see that Theon, despite running away from Euron, decides to stand up for himself because he's been given some redemption through his forgiveness by Jon. So that's given him, bolstered his confidence, I think, quite a bit, and kind of gave him the kick in the butt that he needed. And we get to see that even though he suffered humiliation at Ramsay and mutilation, that happened to be his saving grace, because the old knee to the balls did not work because there wasn't much there to work with, I guess, and he ended up kicking the shit out of the guy and getting the other troops to kind of rally around and try to go find his sister. So maybe Theon, in some way, will cross paths with Euron, who's supposed to be going over to get the Golden Company, which is a mercenary group, to bring back over to King's Landing to apparently, I guess, just raise hell in the south of in the southern half of Westeros, north of Dorne, obviously. Well, maybe they will go down to Dorne and fuck with them. Wouldn't surprise me, especially since House Martella has been crushed. But yeah, they're going to be doing all sorts of probably guerrilla tactics, hit and runs, and attacking and taking over land and castles, and while the real threat is being dealt with, because Cersei thinks that she's somehow got an answer for everything, and she's got a highly inflated opinion of herself as a strategist. She's not her father by any stretch of the imagination. Look, she got pushed into a corner by the High Sparrow and the Queen of Thorns, and her only answer was to blow up the Sept of Baelor and kill all these people. So we see that she's kind of a loose cannon. She's not a very good chess player. Maybe in the beginnings, in the middle of the game, but at the end, she basically had to flip the board over and and stab her opponent to win the chess match. So we're back in Winterfell, and this is probably my, overall favorite scene in the story, just because Littlefinger finally got his comeuppance. And basically because, Littlefinger, at least for me, and, it's just, if we're focusing on the TV show, I won't go into try to describe the characters in the books, because he's a little bit better written in the books. But, it's not a huge difference as far as me personally. He embodies the self-serving career politician who will do anything and say anything and form any alliance and stab anybody in the back in order to advance his own position. It's just, a more colorful version of a politician in the District of Columbia or anywhere in the world, just set into a fantasy, medieval, setting and working within those confines. But yeah, like I said, he's just he represents the worst of what we see in politics and politicians and leaders that are supposed to represent or help people, and they end up just serving their own needs and at the expense of, at times thousands or millions of lives. So he got basically everything that he deserved and more. And a lot of people thought it was kind of lame and that, it was, kind of a melodramatic scene. Well, it's television. Did you expect like an hour-long Shakespearean court scene or something, or build up? The only way that they could have done this justice would have been probably to focus the entire episode on it and further back. So don't have a lot of screen time to work with this particular scenario, so I'm not going to be overly harsh. So Littlefinger is accused, and he's defiant at first, of course, and then he demands to be taken to safety of the Vale, but of course that's not going to happen. And Bran, of course, after telling him that, his own phrase, chaos is a ladder, he basically saw when Littlefinger held the knife to Ned's neck, repeated what he said to him, and he's probably filled in Sansa and Arya on quite a bit more than that, of probably everything that went on during that time period. Plus, remember, Sansa saw him push Lysa out of the moon door, because Lysa was almost probably going to throw Sansa out. So in that case, he was in part protecting Sansa, and but of course it was a maneuver to help himself. And I really would like the part when Sansa, when he's on his knees and is like, oh, I loved your mother since I was a boy, and said, and yet you betrayed her. And I loved you, and yet you betrayed me. So that pretty much sums up Littlefinger in a nutshell. I think he's I don't say would say a male version of Cersei, because that would be selling him way short, but still has that self-serving mindset. I don't even think he's aware of being actually loving someone, or or that actually computes. I think it's just a reaction or a tool that he uses. Say, oh, I love you, or whatever. But now maybe he was in love with Catelyn. But it's hard to say. After that, then I think he was clinging on to the closest thing to Catelyn. I don't know. He wouldn't have sold her off to the Bolton bastard Ramsay Bolton the bastard, if he actually loved her, because he should have known that Ramsay was a psychopath. He's part of the flayed man house, where they skin the conquered alive. So that's not very good thing to do for someone you apparently are in love with. I'm sure there are other arrangements that could be made, which, like there were in the book, wasn't Sansa. And so that knife that he tried to, he symbolically had that at the throat to cut the throat and to sabotage Ned, was literally drug across his neck by the expertise of Arya and Adios Littlefinger. And maybe I was being kind of a mindless TV viewer, but when Sansa, said, how do you, basically, address these charges, Lord Baelish, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right, you are done. So I was I was clapping my hands and saying, hell yeah, that's exactly what I was waiting for. So like I said, it may not have been the best writing and the best plot, but it was very satisfying to see Littlefinger meet his end in the way he deserved, on his knees with his throat slit, like a little wormy little bastard he was. So we jump over to King's Landing, and Cersei and Jaime have their meeting, and Cersei, of course, gives Jaime all the information, that he needs to make a decision to get the hell away from her. I would have been curious to see if, I know they probably would have never happened, but if the giant had actually killed Jaime in that scene, what the reaction of the audience would have been. It has, just to have made it a show only and have him, do something else in the books, which I think would have been, plausible, given, what people would still have the books, and, and then they could just come and say, yeah, this is just how we're treating the Jaime character in the books, Cersei's going to actually have him killed, I prefer him alive because, he's a, someone that valuable to have on the battlefield. But on this other side, I would have loved to have seen the reactions of people if Jaime had actually, had the mountain, run him through from behind with the sword like he did to the Mad King, and in a real Shakespearean type moment. But that didn't happen. It's not a big deal. All right, so we see some snow falling in King's Landing. So Cersei may not have the kind of time she thinks to run amok and then prepare for whoever comes down at the victor from the north. Samwell shows up and talks to Bran, and Bran basically gives him the 411 on Jon's true parents, but he thinks that Rhaegar was still wed to Elia Martell, so that Jon would still be a bastard. Then Sam says, no, Gilly, well, I didn't say that Gilly told him, but basically one of the Septons annulled the marriage, and they married Stark in private, so he's actually Aegon Targaryen, though I don't think that's book canon. They may change the name. The first name at least. And is it, I don't know, is that the same actor that played Viserys in the first episode, or first season, I should say, or did they pick a different actor? It looked like the exact same guy. So I wasn't sure. So now Jon gets to know his parentage next season, possibly. And we see that Jon and Dany decide to knock boots. Tyrion's a little bit worried. We see him in the hallway, and I think it's the emotional connection part that led Dany to fly up there and lose one of her dragons in the first place. That was an emotional connection with Jon, drove her to do that when she got the note or the letter from the Raven. So Tyrion's wondering if that's going to cause her to make some more mistakes down the line when her emotional bond with Jon increases. And Jon's gonna get to find out that he's sleeping with, which I think technically he's sleeping with his aunt. If Rhaegar is the brother, and that's the brother's son. So yeah, he's just slept with his aunt by blood. So I don't know if the show's gonna gloss over that. So there's gonna be an awkward morning after where he realizes he slept with his father's sister. It'd be hard to say, but yeah, Targaryens aren't above incest, so who knows how they'll play that out. I guess it all depends on whether or not Jon and Daenerys end up having a child or not. Back at Winterfell, Arya and Sansa reminisce a bit about the past and them missing their father and what words that he said, about. When the winter's here, they need to stick together as a pack. If they go off as lone wolves, they won't survive. And then Bran is warging into some of the ravens, heads to Eastwatch, I believe, where Beric Dondarrion and Tormund are there. And then we see White Walkers and Whites coming through the tree line to the wall. And of course, lo and behold, there is Viserion being directed or flown by the Night King. And I actually didn't really like the seeing the Night King riding on it. The close-ups just look kind of silly. I don't know, for whatever reason. Especially since there's no kind of saddle or anything, I think it doesn't make it look as cool. I would have actually liked the fact that given I'm assuming the Night King has telepathic abilities to control the Whites, that it would have been awesome if he rode out on horseback out there and they saw him there with his weapon, and they're kind of like, how the heck do you think you guys are going to get over this wall, you fools? And then see the dragon, or hear the dragon roar, and then see the dragon come flying up to the wall and start blasting it with that that Godzilla looking blue fire or whatever. I think that would have been more of a better build up, at least because the Tormund and Beric obviously know that, or aren't aware that the dragon was risen as a white by the Night King. So yeah, I think I would have preferred that, because the close-ups where he's on the back of the dragon, kind of almost not close-up or medium shot, it just looked kind of hokey. I thought looked too fantasy-ish and hokey. I don't know. Just my personal taste. I would have rather have had him come out on his dead horse and, and silence and kind of stared up at the top of the wall. And it's like, how do they, and then, Tormund and Barrett could say, well, how the hell does this guy think he's getting across where the wall's still here? We don't have nothing to worry about, and Jon and everybody's on their way. So we just have to wait and then build that up. And then, like I said, then have the dragon come in and just lay waste to that section of the wall. And, yep, so much for that. No, our time is short, to say the least. But it was a cool ending. I mean, epic fantasy-ish ending with a really amazing-looking CGI dragon. I mean, I paused plenty of times on the little still shots just to see, some of the detail of the dragon, close up with the fire breathing. Kind of made me reminisce of, Dragon Slayer. The old 80s fantasy movie in a little bit of a way. Kind of had a little of a reminiscence of that, or just kind of the impression same kind of impression in that movie had on me that this scene did, with a close up of the face of the dragon is breathing all that fire, and it looked really sweet. But yeah, it was a great episode. For television wise, leaving all of the critique, and whole plot holes and crap aside, it was a solid episode for a casual viewer like myself. And I will definitely be revisiting it many a time because it's just a good, satisfying hour and 20 minutes of fantasy television. Or I guess an hour and 10-ish. I guess you get rid of the credits. But yeah, solid. And unfortunately, that's the end of Season 7. And we may be waiting till 2019 before I do any more Game of Thrones new episodes. As far as that goes, I may go back and do commentary for seasons 1 through 6, just to add to the content that's available for the Game of Thrones. If you prefer how I approach everything, if I'm more casual and less fanboyish, nerdish approach to analyzing the show. But anyway, yeah, this video's getting a bit long, but it was a longer episode. I tried to cut it down as much as I can. But anyway, yep, that's the end of Season 7, folks. We'll see you back in Season 8 whenever that happens. All right, until then, take it easy.